Hello YouTube, Dave here again. This is going to be the first video in a series of videos that I'm aiming towards new players, new people to the Dungeons & Dragons experience. This one in particular is geared towards people who are new and want to DM the game. So this is probably not going to be the most useful for experienced players, but I have been receiving questions from people in comments on Twitter and seeing a lot of posts on some of the Facebook pages that I follow with people who are saying that they're new and they would like to get some advice on how to design villains, adventures, campaigns, stuff like that. So I thought I would try to make a few videos for it, and even if they help somewhat, then they've done their job. Basically, I enjoy teaching D&D, and I know that there's a lot of experienced players out there who are great players, and they're good people to learn from, but they don't have the patience to teach new players, and it can be kind of frustrating and difficult for people who are new to the hobby in those circumstances. So I'm hoping that these will help. So the first thing that I want to do is just talk about when you're a brand new DM, things to keep in mind when you're designing your first adventure. I'll get into things like NPCs and even campaigns in future videos, but right now I just want to start with your first adventure that you're going to design. There are options like the starter set, for example, which is really great. If you are brand new to the game, then this would be a worthwhile purchase. It's only $20-25 depending on where you are. And it has a complete adventure in there, as well as some dice and even some pre-made characters. So for the cost of it, it's easier to get into if you're brand new and not quite sure than getting the books, which tend to go for about $50-60 a piece, before tax. So these can get expensive if you're not sure that this is something that's going to be for you. So this would be a great way to go. There's an adventure in here, so you could simply read that and run that, and that'd be great. There's also, published campaign arcs, like this one here, Hoard of the Dragon Queen, which I'm going to start running as an online game, and the Rise of Tiamat, second part. I don't really recommend this for people who are new, just because there's a lot to this, and there's a lot of work that goes into to running these. So if you're brand new to the hobby, if you've never played or run a game before, then this is probably something to avoid at the start, but something that can be helpful once you get a little bit of experience underneath of you. I want to focus mainly on creating your own adventure for the first one, and basically, really you want to keep it as simple as possible. You don't have to create a full 20-level campaign arc, your first time out. In fact, I don't think you really should. The first adventure should be something that's quick, something that's simple, and something that you could leave open-ended enough that it could lead to something, but self-contained enough that if you don't feel like running anymore, the players that you did run for will feel like they accomplished something at least. So the first thing is, what to do for the adventure. There are some great things that you can look at in the DMG if you have it. But honestly, if you're starting out, don't feel afraid to use the more cliched options. There's nothing wrong with designing an adventure where a local lord hires the party members to go clear out some bandits that are attacking caravans, or some goblins that are making a nuisance for them, for everybody around. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. You may want to stay away from having them killing rats in somebody's cellar, but going and killing goblins and stuff like that, or chasing off some bandits, that's always going to be fun. It's something that even experienced players will still enjoy doing. So if you're new as a DM, but you've played or you have experienced players in the group, that's something that they'll probably get into, even if it does feel a little bit cliched. And it doesn't have to be a masterpiece. You're starting, it's everybody starts somewhere. My first few, the first couple of 2-3 years that I spent running, I wouldn't consider the adventures that I ran to be particularly good. A lot of them the early ones were kind of similar to adventures that I'd already played through, or I had an idea how I wanted the campaign to end, but I didn't quite know how I wanted to get there, and I was a little too focused on the villains in the campaign and they were just bad. They were just flat out bad, and I wish I would have stuck to things that were a little bit more simple. So something like that would be great. You can design your own little dungeon to have them go through. It doesn't have to be necessarily a dungeon, but a little complex network of caves. Or if there's like thieves in the city, for example, that are being a nuisance, then you may have a sewer layer that they have underneath the town. Um, Again, keep it simple. Excuse me. You want it to be something that can be wrapped up in a couple of sessions at most, just for your first one. So, I always recommend doing a 5 to 10 room dungeon complex. If it's 5 rooms, then 3 of the 5 rooms will have encounters, with a couple of encounters perhaps on the way. If it's a 10-room dungeon, then there's about 6 to 7 encounters that I would have. One would be on the way to the dungeon or the area that you're going to be exploring, and there might be one as guards to the entrance of it, and then the rest would take place within the complex itself. Things to keep in mind: you want to keep it relatively simple. For those 10 rooms. But you also want to have rooms that would make sense for people that are living there. So there'd always have to be even if it's just a room with a fire pit where you would know that they were preparing their meals, for example. A room that had some furs on a floor, if not cots or beds or stuff like that, to indicate that people are sleeping there, and just kind of think about the functionality of it. And what you want for the layout. The room with the final encounter, which could be the leader of the bandits, or like a bugbear that's leading the hobgoblin or the goblins, things of that nature. That should be the room that's the furthest away from the entrance and the most difficult to get to. So it shouldn't be a straight line. You probably want to have twists and turns and corridors and stuff like that, and something that they're not going to be able to just look down the hallway and see that this is the room with the double door, so that must be where the villain is. I myself have been guilty of designing dungeons where I put a lot of thought and time into it, but then it turns out that by taking just a couple of turns, they ended up finding the room with all the treasure and stuff like that. So you kind of want to try to make sure that stuff like that's a bit difficult to find. As far as encounters go, try to make them as simple as possible for the most part. You don't want them to be too long. You just want, if it's goblins, for example, have, one goblin per character plus an additional one. For the most part, have them have a combination of ranged and melee, just to make things a bit interesting. And as they progress deeper in, then they might come to a shaman, for example, who has a couple of cure spells or a little fire spell that he can throw at you. But you don't want to make the encounters too involved to begin with. The goal of your first adventure basically is to have fun, which is always the first one. But you want to get familiar with the rhythm of running a game, how to set up for combat when it does arrive, and even maybe have some light role playing in the beginning when you're there talking to the Lord or some other NPCs in the town. But basically, I guess the main advice that I can really give right now is just keep it simple. Don't think that you have to write, a fabulous campaign that's going to put any other published adventure to shame on your first go. I wouldn't think that far ahead. I would just run the first adventure to be relatively self-contained, but leave something. So perhaps the boss of the dungeon, for example, has a note that's not signed with any name or anything like that, but it's just obviously from a superior, telling them that they're growing impatient and they should retrieve what they were sent to get, or something along those lines, just so there's something that you could expand upon if it goes well. But again, keep it self-contained enough, and don't worry too much about what's going to happen in the future. Just focus on your first adventure, but really just have fun with it, I guess, is really the most important thing. And if you're not having fun with it, then don't feel like you should have to do it. This is a hobby. It's something that's meant to be fun for everybody involved. So do what feels fun for you. The DMG is a great resource. Obviously, there's things for creating random dungeons, random NPCs, which we'll talk about later, and there's like the listings of monsters by challenge rating, for example. So you may want to look in that if you're going to design something. I guess that's really all I have for this first introductory video. I'll get more into designing dungeons in a future one, but I just kind of wanted to touch base a little bit on this, and you know, we'll kind of go from there. So I think the next video will be about designing an interesting villain for your adventure, or your first adventure. So that should be out in the next few days or so. I know there wasn't a lot necessarily in this, but I hope it was helpful for people who are new. Just kind of give them some basic ideas. If you have some pre-written adventures, even if you don't plan on running them, it's always a good idea to read through them and kind of see how they lay them out, how they structure them. That could be really helpful for when you're designing things. But anyway, I guess that's it for this video, and you know, I hope it helped, such as it was. And the next one that we will do will be on designing some NPCs. Thank you.